Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us for this lecture as part of the ERI Friedman Family Visiting Professionals Program. My name is Nancy, and it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Janiele Maffei, who is the Chief Mitigation Officer of the California Earthquake Authority, also known as CEA. In this capacity, she serves as the Executive Director of the California Residential Mitigation Program, managing mitigation incentive programs, code development, and mitigation research. She is licensed as both a civil engineer and structural engineer in California with 40 years of experience. I am excited to hear more about her work and experience, and I'm sure you all are. But in the meantime, if you have questions during the presentation, please feel free to put them in the chat. Jesse and I will be monitoring them. And Janiele, thank you very much for taking the time to speak with us today, and the floor is yours.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. And Nancy, there's it's the perfect size that if there's a question during the presentation where you feel that moving on, we've kind of missed the main theme, please feel free to, if you want, I don't know, I'll be able to see you raise your hand, but you can just say Janiele or Jay or Yo, whatever. I don't have an easy names to sometimes to catch, and so I take no offense if you have a hard time, but it is a pleasure to be here. And I would normally be absolutely thrilled to be on your campus, taking a tour, seeing your research facilities and meeting you in person, and would have spent time going around the room and asking you obviously your name, where you're from, and then where you are in your education. But since we can't, I hope to meet you in the future, hopefully maybe at an ERI annual meeting. So a couple slides at the beginning that talk about the Earthquake Engineering Research Institute, really a tremendous institute, an organization made up of multidisciplinary professionals. And that's what I like most about it. If you get involved in the American Plywood Association, the concrete, those guys, predominantly engineers. And this organization is really about the big picture and the notion of reducing risk. And so you want to advance the science, and there are many grants that ERI provides that really do that, improving the understanding of the impact of earthquakes, and once again multidisciplinary, so not just in the engineering realm, and then advocating comprehensive and realistic measures. So I think one of the most important things when you are working in, we'll call it the disaster field, is to not just be Chicken Little, if you all remember the children's story about the sky is falling, but essentially to bring solutions as well, and solutions in a language that people can understand. So ERI, three major principles: connect, learn, lead. So we're connecting. The contacts that I have made with my work with ERI have been just so valuable to my profession. When I made this huge change that I'll show you from consulting engineer to where I'm working now, learning, I learn, and gosh, that's what I love most about my job is, and I bet you do too about engineering, is that you continue to learn. And then leading. The idea here is to not sit around and wait until people ask you questions to answer them, but rather to bring them forth and to try and affect policy. So how I got involved in EER, I got to make this slide up, and this was really interesting. So I was in my kind of early 30s working for Degenkolb Engineers, and Chris asked, he knew that I had a lot of experience in wood framing, if I would join him to go down to look at damage in the magnitude 6.5 1992 Big Bear earthquake. And predominantly residential structures, mostly hillside and mostly second homes, lots of cabins around the Big Bear Lake. And I noticed this kind of zipper effect where if you look at the drawing in the bottom right, obviously there's a lot of torsion. When you look at loads that are parallel to that tall, slender wall at the bottom of the hill. And so as you have, the torsion is resisted by the two side walls, the top wall is very short and stiff, and so it wants to take load first. And what I noticed is those were all ripped up, and then there was a little bit more damage to the one below, and then so essentially, the majority of the stiffness and the walls that were taking the load were up at the top. And so Chris and I wrote a newsletter report that unfortunately I cannot find. I'm going to hunt for that till the day I die. But they wouldn't let me put my name on it because I wasn't an EERI member. And so I insisted that I become a member and that I be cited on the newsletter. So I found a little bit of voice there as well. Engineers are geoscientists, engineers, architects, planners, social scientists, researchers. I've served on the board. I served for 6 years. And the people that I met by serving on the board from across the spectrum of our profession was just so valuable. School Earthquake Safety Initiative. There are initiatives to join that will match your passions, and this is one. California is a little bit further ahead in many respects in all aspects of earthquake engineering. Obviously, we have places throughout the country where we have children still in unreinforced masonry, and there are people who are endeavoring to do something about it with the full support of EERI. The Learning from Earthquakes is our flagship program. So this is taking professionals, sending them after an earthquake, and then most importantly, they come back and they share through spectra, papers, they share through presentations, and I think it was probably one of these presentations that got me hooked on earthquake engineering. And then we have a program for people at kind of the beginning of their career, which is fantastic. I'm hoping they'll let me take it someday. They had an amazing trip in 2017 to the Chile earthquake had happened a couple of years earlier, but essentially it was to teach them how to do recon after an earthquake and to see how it affected that region, long-term effects. And then once again, they brought that back to the profession. Student membership benefits. I hope you're all enjoying these benefits. Travel grants to the ERI annual meetings. I hope I get to meet you all at a meeting sometime. Access to earthquake spectra, other really important things. And of course, all this on the website. And then, so what can you do after graduation? We hope that you'll continue to be affiliated with the ERI, join the Young Members Committee. Outstanding to make sure you have a great network of people your age. And I'll tell you a little bit further how that's helped me in my career. The opportunity for you to get to know people, work on a committee, those kinds of things, put you in contact with people who can help you enhance your career. And of course, we have regional chapters around the United States, and those, once again, are all available on the website. So hope you continue your ERI membership and involvement. And just a reminder that the week of March 22nd is the virtual annual meeting, easy to attend. Lots of stuff that I think that you'll find interesting. Networking events, a reconnaissance presentation, and then obviously tremendous research that's highlighted. And once again, eeri.org, and lots of information to encourage you to keep involved in this wonderful organization. So what do I do? My work right now is all about earthquake risk and resilience, and my title is the Chief Mitigation Officer, CMO, and Chief allows me to serve on the executive team, which is really exciting. It means that I'm part of the planning, the strategic planning of the organization, and it also means that mitigation for this, what I'll tell you is an insurance company, is really important that I serve, at that capacity. So let me tell you a little bit about myself here. So this is my nifty graphic here. Born in Oakland, California, and have lived in the Bay Area my whole life. Obviously, there was quite a bit of nurturing that went on between that and when I received my BA in architecture from UC Berkeley. Always drawing plans, inventing computers, Legos, blocks. I was always building. I'm sure this sounds a lot like many of you in your youth. Thought I wanted to be an architect, but when I was at UC Berkeley, took all of my electives in engineering so that I actually had all of the prerequisites to get my MS in civil engineering. So I was really drawn to the different study, the more technical study of the engineering department, and got my master's degree in structural engineering. And when I graduated, went to work for a company that was actually bought by Black & Veatch, so little wastewater treatment work there, but worked as a consulting engineer for a variety of different firms, and got married in, graduated master's degree in 80. My husband and I had met early in Berkeley career. So we got married. We both got our civil and structural engineering licenses, 2 engineers. And one of those unusual people in 1983 had had both sons in my 20s. So a lot of life work balance, which I can talk about when I talk about my career. So as a structural engineer working in San Francisco, I was working for Ferrell Assessor at the time. I say, so this is the 80s. I was on the mommy track at work and the work track at home, and it was not working. And so I quit my job on a Friday and opened up Janiele Maffei Structural Engineer on a Monday, and was never without work. And the reason I was never without work is I let all of my graduate student friends and all of my contacts know that I was job shopping or consulting or whatever you wanted to call it. And they were happy to include me in projects. They knew they didn't have to fire me at the end. And it worked out very, very well for 6 years. And then one of the companies, Degenkolb, that I was working with, when my children, my youngest went to kindergarten, it offered me, and I said, I want a part-time, what is it, full? I'm messing this up. A full, a permanent, pardon me, permanent part-time position. So 24 hours a week, I went to work for Degenkolb Engineers in San Francisco. And I told Chris Poland that, 24 hours, you may get more from me than you get from people in 40. Because I need to get my work done and I want my reputation to be intact. And it was great experience, but allowed me some flexibility with my children. And then somewhere around 2004, my husband works for Computers and Structures Incorporated, and I went back to being a consulting engineer again and was able to travel with him. So despite my 15-mile radius in the Bay Area, I hope I'm somewhat worldly. We're getting close to 50 countries that we visited, always with a host that shows us the world. 2011, the Chief Mitigation Officer for the California Earthquake Authority flashed across my screen, and it was California resilience and residential construction passions of mine. And so I kind of came out of what I call semi-retirement and joined the CEA, and it is my dream job, and I have no intention of retiring for some time. So what's interesting about my job, I talked about how exciting that multidisciplinary nature of ERI is mine is very multidisciplinary, my job. In that my background, of course, and 40, what is it now, 30 when I started, years of engineering, it was all about physical sciences, the physics, chemistry, of engineering, applied research, applied science. And what would that be? Right brain. And the reality is my job is very much about changing behavior, which is social science. So very left brain. And it is very exciting to be in a position to not only advance the engineering of resilience in earthquake resilience, but rather to be part of making it part of policy, public policy, and changing behaviors in Californians so they can become more resilient in earthquakes. And one of the things that you have to learn when you're in that zone between physical and social sciences is that it's a different language. I mean, obviously, we all grew up studying math, science, not a lot of communication. Certainly when I was in engineering school, I think we're getting better about realizing the importance of it. But, nobody asks you how, a differential equation feels. The connection between, the physical sciences and what that does to a person, what that does to a community, to society is not often really delved into. And so when we're thinking about the people that we are trying to protect, who are ultimately going to be making the decisions about their resilience, obviously the physical sciences, don't translate easily to those people. And those people are thinking about, things that are that are very different, important things that we think about. So obviously the terminology, the words, our focus in engineering needs to translate into what is important to a person. And in my position now, I am dealing predominantly with someone's home, so single family dwellings. And what they're interested in is family, it's safety, it's their children. This is where their family sleeps at night. They want to be protected. They want consistency in their lives. They don't like, huge disruption. Gosh, if we've learned anything from the last year. But we've learned in the last year we are resilient. And, that when we're at our best, we can be part of a community. But these are all things that, there's a vocabulary that I really needed to learn to be able to translate engineering into what really resonates with people. So real quick thing about the CEA, the California Earthquake Authority, was created essentially in 1984. We weren't really created, but with the mandatory offer law that passed in California that stated, if you sell insurance policies in California, you must offer earthquake insurance, separate policy. Homeowners not obligated to buy it, but you must offer it. So that mandatory offer law was in place when the 1994 earthquake happened. $40 billion in damage, half of that residential, half of that insured. They lost their shirts and they said, we're out of here. And they started to stop writing policies in California and they were going to pull out. So it was a huge financial catastrophe. You know, you have to have fire insurance on your house for most mortgages. And so the legislature created the California Earthquake Authority, unique instrumentality of the state. We're not an agency, publicly managed, privately financed. Publicly managed means that the 3 top elected officials serve on our board. They send designees, they don't come themselves. Governor, Insurance Commissioner, Treasurer, 2 members from the Assembly and the Senate, but privately financed. We're not part of the state's budget. And so the money came from the participating insurers who are part of us and the policyholders over the year. And then, of course, a mission to educate, mitigate, and insure. So these are our partners. So essentially, we have all the money for claims payments. We're the people who take the money from the participating insurers. When they join us, they bring in a certain amount of money, and from the policyholders, and we hold that money, we invest it, we get reinsurance, and we are prepared to pay claims after an earthquake. But you buy it from your home insurance company and they will adjust your claim in the event of an earthquake and in case of damage. So there are partners, our participating insurers, and we have almost $20 billion in payout capacity. And tiny little words there, but you can see that tower indicates how much money we have available to pay claims. 6.2 billion in cash could cover an 1868 Hayward earthquake. It's almost a 7.0. We could do 2 Northridge earthquakes, and we could very easily cover the 1906 earthquake if it happened today. So tremendous amount of payout capacity, and unfortunately, though, that comes with a policy that is, reasonably, well, let's say it's not cheap, but expensive and cheap are words that mean different things to different families. So we're battling something that's not, just, oh yeah, we'll get it, but something they have to make a very definite decision to get. So we're battling myths. First and foremost, the sad thing is people think that their homeowner's policy covers earthquakes. Earthquake happens, they find out it doesn't. That is, really devastating to me. But so they have to get a separate policy. First thing we're battling. The other one is that the government will bail me out. This happens with all disasters all across the country. FEMA is not an insurance company except for flood. FEMA doesn't come back in and make you whole. What FEMA does is it has emergency funding. It will take care of people who are, very, very low income, who, have absolutely no means. But if you have means, actually, you go to the SBA and you get a low interest loan. It's a very good low interest loan, but you add that to your mortgage. You have to pay that back. And so, that's why insurance is something that people should at least consider. And so we have on our website, earthquakeauthority.com, an opportunity for people to get a free estimate. And they go in and they put in their information. They say they're a homeowner, renter, condo owner, mobile homeowner, and they can calculate what their premium will be. They can play with the deductible. They can play with all of the various things that they cover. And they're always surprised it's less expensive than they thought. As I said, not inexpensive, but less expensive. And of course, it changes by your geographic location where you are in California. I live right next to the Hayward Fault. We live in the Bay Area where, replacement costs are very high. My insurance is very high. I could get it in Sacramento for a couple $100s a year. So that's the core business insurance. And so in order to do that, I said educate, mitigate, insure. So educate. I want them to make homeowners to make an informed decision about their risk and about what they do about it. So here, and I am not 100% in plain English in this one because I know that you're all, have an engineering background or engineering students. And so a little bit higher level than I would necessarily talk about with homeowners. So risk is hazard plus vulnerability plus exposure. So hazard is, where you are, location, 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 relative to the fault and what kind of soil you're on. Vulnerability is the type of structure you're in. And then exposure is the number of structures, that are essentially someone's responsibility. So in California, our purview, our exposure is all of California, and the vulnerability is the housing stock. And then, of course, you can see those bright red colors in California. We have quite a bit of hazard. Hazard, as I mentioned, includes, your location includes surface faulting, ground shaking, landslide, liquefaction, tectonic deformation, tsunamis, and seiches. So all of the different geological hazards that can happen in an earthquake are also part of the hazard. So location. You really can have an earthquake anywhere in the world. There are some places that it's just so extremely rare that, really don't think about it. Obviously, there are places, and these are the top three. One is the Ring of Fire. So if you look at that Pacific Plate, this entire area around the Pacific Plate is number one on the list. The Alpide Belt is, if you look at any place in the world that has, dramatic geography, obviously the Himalayas, that's tectonic action. So here's, the plate comes over on this side too. And the Mid-Atlantic range, the good thing about that one is that, with the exception of Iceland, is not really close to any populations. But those are the primary areas. But we know very well that in the 1800s, there were two significant earthquakes out there in New Madrid area of central United States. And we know that there was a significant earthquake in Charleston, and there is a capability, what is it, something, St. Anne, was it Point up in Boston area. Alaska, of course, huge risk. And then you look at the Hawaiian Islands as you go down towards Hawaii, where the volcanic action is, you get increasingly more. Interesting now, there are maps, or risk maps now include non-tectonic. So this is all fracking here in Oklahoma City. So what is the risk in North Carolina? Well, North Carolina has a great website. What's it called? It's called the Department of Environmental Quality, is it? You guys are covering that. So I found historic earthquakes, and my little thing is moved here. That should be right about up there. A magnitude 6 is really capable of significant damage, particularly, with the unreinforced masonry that you have. And then, of course, every day you can go in and see, what the recent earthquakes have been. And I'm glancing at my clock here. All, ones, twos, pretty small, but definitely there. One way of looking at earthquakes that's a lot better than Richter, that logarithmic scale is very difficult to translate, is the modified Mercalli intensity scale. This one is really good because it's talking about damage. And so it's a lot easier to translate damage into, as I say, plain English. So, when we're looking at the scale, one is nobody feels it. The 2s and 3s, everybody thinks they've been in an earthquake, but they really don't do any damage. When you start to get 5, you might see a book fall off of a shelf, the cracked plaster, but it's really when you get up to that 7 that you see damage to buildings of good design and construction is negligible, but poorly built or badly designed structures. So unfortunately, we have to consider so much of, the central and eastern part of the United States to be these poorly built simply because they were not built to earthquake standards. And, the big one, of course, is unreinforced masonry. So in California, we certainly had unreinforced masonry. We have non-ductile concrete. And then we have, some good buildings. And of course, our hospitals and schools are getting closer to being able to withstand, some really significant ground shaking. I know that you're all aware of Charleston, South Carolina, 1886 earthquake, and you can see that here's our MMI of 7 was very definitely felt in North Carolina, and that was able to produce what is kind of peach color, damage. And then, even this 6, really, really bad structures. And then I was mentioning to Nancy and Jesse that, the rock composition in the East Coast is so different from the West Coast. Ours is newer. And so you feel ground motions further distances. They talk about the New Madrid. I think I have the New Madrid. No, I don't. Anyway, you feel them for much longer distances, and that New Madrid earthquake was felt, as far as Boston. Whereas, we have really intense shaking, but it attenuates very quickly in California. And then, of course, 1916 magnitude 5.2 Skyland, North Carolina earthquake absolutely could bring down chimneys. could have, parapets and, the tops of hipped roofs. The masonry at the top of a hipped roof is very vulnerable to falling out. Absolutely could produce that. 1916. Of course, for many areas, when you go back in time, the advantage you have is you usually have a lot less population. And then, of course, the Virginia earthquake of 2011, very, very capable of creating damage. Obviously, the nice stiff but unreinforced masonry in Virginia, severely damaged. We saw kind of long period structures like the cathedral and the monument in Washington, D.C. Obviously saw significant damage as well. So, these 5s and 6s can be troublesome. Out where I live, California is home to 2/3 of our nation's earthquake risk. So Alaska has more earthquakes, but fewer people. And most Californians live within 30 miles of an active fault. Almost 85% of our population lives along this San Andreas fault zone here. Here's the Bay Area and here's the Los Angeles area. So this, bright red is, the probability of an earthquake. This is kind of locked and loaded, they call it, the San Andreas fault and all of the faults that lie either side of it. Not a lot of population here, but certainly significant potential for earthquakes. So there's more than a 99% chance of a Northridge size 6.7 earthquake happening in California. So as I mentioned, my purview is California. So what I tell people, particularly FEMA, when I'm trying to get funding is, look, for my purview, there's a near certainty in the next 30 years of a Northridge size earthquake. And then if you go to different parts of the state, you can also calculate the 76% chance of a 7 in Northern California. And with that silly Richter scale, of course, nearly 3 times the energy. So larger area affected, stronger ground shaking affected, affecting more people in that magnitude 7 earthquake. One of the reasons, for the difference in magnitude and MMI, of course, is the length of fault rupture. And so I try and use, simple visual cues, graphics when I'm trying to educate. And I thought this was an interesting one. People in Northern California think the Loma Prieta earthquake, the Bay Area, think that the Loma Prieta earthquake was their earthquake. And the reality, I'll show you the shake map. It was a significant earthquake, but actually pretty far south of San Francisco. Look at the 1906 rupture, 200 and well, I think it was 60 miles. That was really the Northern California earthquake. Not San Francisco and Santa Rosa and those areas had population, not a lot of population up north, thank goodness. But that's an important thing for people to understand is, that the difference in size of an earthquake relates to, the amount of rupture, whether or not it starts in the middle and goes in either direction or starts at one end and goes this way. There's directivity. So for the layperson, basically I'm using all of these things to say, you live in earthquake country. You live in earthquake country. So here is the shake map that USGS created. Obviously, we didn't have the technology in 1906, but for ground shaking. So MMI, once again, red and black colors, really extreme, severe shaking. And then you could see it was felt all the way out to, so Truckee on the right, that's Lake Tahoe, well into Nevada, Oregon. I think they felt it in Mexico, certainly the LA area, and severe shaking all along the coast. Fortunately, populations not like they are today. This was the Loma Prieta earthquake in 1989. You can see, so there's San Francisco is up here. This is where I live, right here. And it was down here. So, there were kind of 5s. In the soft bay mud, we saw some 6. So what we saw in the Bay Area was structures that were very, very vulnerable or very poor, particularly those that were on soft mud that amplified the ground shaking. We saw very little residential damage, single family residential damage kind of above this area. And obviously Santa Cruz was severely hit. They had unreinforced masonry. So, I'm constantly telling people your house was not fully tested in the Loma Prieta earthquake. And then when I'm trying to describe, the capability of a larger earthquake, this is to scale here, the Loma Prieta on the left and the San Andreas 1906 on the right. And so trying to use graphics and colors to describe shaking. And with the 1906 earthquake, trying and disavow the notion that there was no shaking damage in San Francisco before the fire, because there clearly was. And that the earthquake that you felt, particularly the small earthquake, was not the test earthquake for you. Another thing that we utilize are scenario earthquakes. So these are not earthquakes that actually happened, but rather earthquakes that we imagine can happen. And this is a 7.9 scenario on the southern San Andreas Fault. San Andreas Fault is to the northeast of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles is here. This is Los Angeles County. 10 million people in this county. Little bit less population down in this way, but you know, the idea here is a rupture here, sending all this direct activity up here would be a significant earthquake. So we utilize these scenario earthquakes to we can come up with dollar losses, we can come up with expected fatalities, what kind of buildings will be challenged, and those seem to resonate quite well with people. But the most important thing, of course, is that in addition to hazard, we have vulnerability. So for a homeowner, the exposure is one house, but it's the single most expensive thing that they will ever own. And it's, once again, it's where they sleep, it's where their family sleeps, it's home. And so vulnerability is the characteristics of the individual structure. And in shortly after I got to the CEA, I realized that we needed to have more information about what the typical vulnerabilities were. So we paid for the development of an ATC body of work. It is called FEMA P1100 now, that identified the cripple wall house, the living space over garage, the hillside house, and the masonry chimney as the top 4 vulnerabilities. And I'll tell you that what was important was to not only identify them, but to be able to tell people what to do about it. So a cripple wall is a very un-PC term, which is all of construction is just, I mean, to try and get rid of the un-PC terms would be just a nightmare. It's really the short wall that surrounds a crawl space. So if you think about wood framing in your neighborhood, if you see vents or an access area, and there's a crawl space underneath, the short stud walls that go around the crawl space are called cripple walls, and they support that first wall. We also supported research that was completed by Peer at UC Berkeley, utilized all the major earthquake institutes in California that studied that cripple wall house and said, okay, so what if you retrofit that crawl space, what is the reduction in damage? And so we found that there's a tremendous difference between 1-story and 2-story houses, and a difference between wood siding and stucco houses. Certainly a difference between 4 geographic locations. And so what we selected were scenario earthquakes in each of these locations for this graphic. They did a spectrum of earthquakes in these various areas. But for example, the San Francisco magnitude 7 earthquake, for the 2-story wood siding house, the worst house we have, $200,000 less damage for the retrofitted house. That was based on a $200 per square foot replacement cost, which is not what you have in San Francisco. You have closer to $600. So we're talking about $600,000 reduction in damage. Huge, huge reduction in damage. And so we are able to now provide people with an idea of what a retrofit will save them in terms of after an earthquake. And these are the kinds of homes that we're targeting with our retrofits. So this is a house where there's no cripple wall, but there's definitely a crawl space, and the house still needs to be anchored. Obviously, the old Victorians need to be anchored. This one has that other added living space over garage, but all of this part of the house has that cripple wall. So we targeted those, and we targeted them because they do this. This is the magnitude 6.0 Napa earthquake in 2014. Here's that short cripple wall. You can see they topple, and sometimes this sill plate just comes right off of the foundation. You know, horrible for porches, appurtenances, we call them. This one obviously blocked the door. This house could have gone up in flames because, of course, it severed the gas line. This was a really sad one. I met the owner. This was his parents' home that he inherited. They still lived with him. Very poorly maintained, which makes it even worse because the wood has little capacity. There was an old-fashioned truck over here that it was literally sitting on. It had come off of its foundation. And all of those houses, I kept going back to Napa, almost 3 years later, were not yet reoccupied. It took them that long to find the funding, all the while living outside the home, to repair those houses. So we created a solution of a sort. And it was the California Residential Mitigation Program, our Earthquake Brace and Bolt program, provides a grant to homeowners in California of up to $3,000 to retrofit that vulnerability. And we have now done over 14,000 homes. This is a classic crawl space under a house. You can see here's the concrete foundation, the mud sill, here's those short little stud walls, here's the floor, and here's the solution. So you go in and you brace the cripple walls with plywood or OSB, properly nailed, and you clip the floor to the top plate of the cripple wall, and then you anchor the mud sill to the concrete foundation. Oops, let me go back real quick. When you can't come in with a roto hammer from the top to put in an anchor bolt and an epoxy or expansion anchor, you come in from the side with these foundation plates. And that is about a $5,200 retrofit on median in the state of California. So $3,000 you can see goes quite a ways. We are in the process of developing a living space over garage or ESS program because we recognize that we had great success with our EBB or our brace and bolt program, and recognize that this kind of house also needs work. If you find an old 1906 picture, I apologize for not being able to show it. They're standing and they're watching the city burn with these houses in front of them that were perfectly intact after the 1906 earthquake, because they did not have garages on the first floor. Many of them had rooms, they had walls, they certainly had a wall at the garage door. And they might have had lots of damage, but they did not come over. And of course, we created a soft story by opening up that garage and putting in that door. We saw this in the 1989 Loma Prieta earthquake, single family dwellings with these garage doors. This one obviously came all the way down. This is a problem that also exists in multifamily. But it unfortunately kind of crosses generations of construction as well. This one's probably a 1960s house. These spindly little walls either side of the garage just don't have the capacity to support. But we have a solution for this as well. And it is to put in an element either side of the garage door and then to sheathe the garage with plywood or OSB. These guys cost about $1,000 a piece. And you can see they're created for this. They're very narrow. And in one where you have a little bit more room, they actually will make them out of, they're pre-engineered, but they're made out of plywood. They're called strong walls, hardy walls, a bunch of different names for them. And then if you have, those don't provide enough capacity, maybe you have a couple of garages, maybe you have a 5-unit, 4-unit. Of course, there are pre-manufactured steel elements that can go in, might need a new foundation. These are a little bit more expensive retrofits, probably $15,000 to $25,000. So we'll be looking to establish a grant for this kind of work that is more than $3,000. And then very importantly, our $3,000 on a 5,000 or more retrofit, of course, doesn't meet the needs of our low-income citizens in California. So we are going to introduce a pilot program this year to provide the $3,000 grant and a supplementary grant that brings it all the way up, if not the total amount, pretty close to the total amount, for people who qualify as low income. And that'll be a whole other social science study. And we have this great ArcGIS tool now. The dots are the EBB houses that we have retrofitted. This is the Los Angeles area. You can see Los Angeles right here. This is called San Bernardino out here. And then this is the median income legend. And so you can see these pink, red colors are the lower income areas. Now, it's very important to note that it's not that we're in this area and just not doing very well. We're not even in this area yet, because we went to 4 zip codes our first year, which was 2014. And we have grown zip codes every year. And we were not looking at income. We were looking at the hazard and the number of pre-1940 vulnerable houses. And so we've grown based on risk. But our next zip codes are definitely going to be down here. And so we recognize that they'll need assistance, and of course, San Bernardino. But the great thing is that in areas of low income, I have some data here, and I have lots of data here that show me that the cost of the retrofit there is actually pretty darn close to $3,000. So our supplementary grants don't have to be too much more. And we're already, particularly in this area in San Bernardino, we're already meeting the needs of that community, because our $3,000 grant for most of those homeowners is covering their retrofit. So obviously the cost of living in an area will affect the cost. So very excited. But I'm going to be going into communities here that are that are low income, multicultural. There may be, more English as a second language. And so the idea here is I don't profess to be a social scientist. I am an avid learner of what I need to learn to be successful in these areas, but we're going to be looking for partners. We're going to be looking in the area, like of this area for people who are already there serving these communities, these vulnerable communities, and so that they can be our partners. We obviously will increase our outreach to low-income homeowners in areas we are already in. And then once again, our intent is to capture more low-income areas by growing. So that's the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program, the upcoming Earthquake Soft Story program, and the new pilot for low income. It's funded by the CEA. The CEA funds the administrative costs. I manage about $5 million a year come in to help us do the research and administration. And then we're utilizing FEMA grants for the retrofits themselves. And we're currently managing $23 million from FEMA and lots of applications in for additional funding. So we're leveraging our funding with federal funding, and we did get some state funding, and we're certainly looking for more of that. But that is for, and it's for all Californians. These are not policyholders. Our charge at the CEA is to have insurance for our policyholders, but our mitigation program is intended for all Californians. By being in only a few zip codes, obviously, we're in quite a big area of the Bay Area and Los Angeles, but we're not in every zip code yet. We're not yet meeting the needs of all Californians, but we're working towards that. But EBB also, because it has limited funding, can't be open all the time. So the program is going online, but all the time, but our registration is only once a year. And so when it's not registration time, we're hesitant to send people to that website for information because they go, oh, you don't want somebody to hit a roadblock ever, because a lot of people bounce off that and they never come back. So we created a website for everyone that has all the information about everything I just talked about, but is not talking about a grant. So the idea here is that we will be promoting to people, come here, learn all the things that I just talked about, the kind of vulnerability you may have. We have a place to go to see the maps, to see if you're in an area of liquefaction or landslide. We have information, as you drill down into these, like for example, in the raised foundation or that cripple wall. Okay, so simple visual cues. You're going to have steps up to the first floor. You'll see vents. You'll have an access panel. If you poke your head underneath, you'll see wood framing. We have a contractor's directory, an engineer's directory. We have information about what plan sets, what code you should use, and just lots of information. And of course, we include other vulnerabilities. I didn't get into the post and peer. And I saw a lot of these, frankly, in North Carolina and South Carolina. Houses in areas of wet climate are on post and piers. They have lots of ventilation under the house, and particularly in areas that might have flooding. Unfortunately, there's no foundations. There's nothing to bolt to, and they do not do well in an earthquake. And so the idea is you go in and you put in a new foundation. And then, of course, these chimneys and fireplace surrounds that can come off the wall. So lots of information for people. And then, of course, under how to pay for a retrofit, we do refer them to Earthquake Brace and Bolt. They can give us their email. We'll let them know when registration starts. So I'm going to close here and entertain questions with two pictures from the Napa earthquake. So I met the CEO of California Earthquake Authority in Napa. It's about an hour north from where I live, at 9 o'clock in the morning. So the earthquake happened, I think, at 3. Woke me up, woke up our chief actuary who lives in San Francisco. And then all of us have on our cell phones the USGS alert. And so those of us who felt it, though, we didn't need the alert. It woke us up. I knew it was a big earthquake. And it's a big earthquake because it goes on for a while. And I can feel that I didn't get any, sharp waves. I'm getting all the gentle, I'm far away from it, but it's a big one. And so immediately went online and saw that it was a magnitude 6 in Napa, knew that it was going to change my life for quite a few months, maybe years, and met Glenn in Napa. And it was the first time he'd seen earthquake damage up close. He's from North Dakota, knew flooding. Certainly he had been the insurance commissioner of North Dakota, pardon me. And met him and I had all kinds of training from the earthquakes in California that I'm really good at seeing damage. It's like you turn on this filter. And I was driving by these two houses. Now the fence was not up yet because it was the morning of the earthquake. And this house had been taped off by the police. They were riding around on bicycles, taping off things. These are identical houses with the exception of the porch. They used to be the same height. And they had definitely have a cripple wall. See the vent right there, steps up to that first floor. This one had completely come off its foundation, was just in a lot of trouble and was about to be red tagged. I met the owner of the blue house. He was walking out. And I said, hi, Janiele Maffei, I'm a structural engineer. I work for the California Earthquake Authority. I just noticed your house, came through this pretty well. I said, had you done any retrofit? And he said, what's retrofit? And I thought, okay, that's not good. And I said, have any plywood bolts under the house? And he goes, oh yeah, I'd done a little bit of that after the 2000 Yountville earthquake because I knew that houses came off their foundation. So he'd done it himself, hadn't done a code compliant one, had about $50,000 worth of finish damage and, had to repair things, never had to move out of his house, could shelter in place, could be part of the renaissance of the Napa community. Guy on the left actually had 3 tenants out for 3 years, all the while looking for the funding to put that house back together again, all that income lost. And of course, if it had been his home, would have had to displace his family. Clear lesson. And we have lots of these lessons that we've seen. And now with 16,000 houses, or was it 14,000 houses retrofitted throughout California in accordance with the code. In the event of an earthquake, I am so excited. I'm sorry that people will have damage. So I have to temper my excitement. But to you, I'll tell you I'm excited. We have data upcoming now about houses on the same street that are code compliantly retrofitted and those that are not, so that we can start to develop even more ammunition to push our case, to encourage FEMA for more funding, to encourage homeowners, to show them. And we didn't see any cripple wall damage in the Ridgecrest earthquake. It was predominantly the houses were kind of desert houses, don't have this condition. But in the future we will. So there's a research project after an earthquake ready to happen. I'm hoping all of our EBB houses stay on their foundation. Obviously, we all know uncertainty and probabilistics. But I think you can tell that when I talk about this, that I get very excited, because this is my dream job. This is a job where I'm making a difference, where people tell me unprompted that they sleep better at night when their houses are retrofitted. So it's exciting to be able to take a lifelong consulting engineering experience and turn it into developing policy, putting incentive programs out in the community, making a difference, and making California more resilient for earthquakes. And now I will happily stop and questions, comments, and I'm going to stop sharing so that I can see everybody's face. Everybody goes, wow, she talks really fast when she talks about earthquakes. Any questions?
Janiele,
No?
I had I just wanted to say one observation. I think it's a really good example of how government can help people, and how a small amount of money goes a long ways in detailing matters. Have you you kind of answered this at the end. As you were going through those retrofits, I was wondering in the back of my head is what sort of contractor compliance have you had to worry about that? It sounds like you had that already, like a book of acceptable contractors. Has that been an issue at all, or are these folks mostly, everything being done properly to your satisfaction?
Yeah, so we did know it was going to be an issue. And so I didn't mention this, but we require that the homeowner use a particular plan set that's been adopted into the California existing building code. We require that they use that code. And so it's a code compliant retrofit. The whole house is not being brought up to code, just the crawl space. For FEMA, they have to use the contractor on the list, and they will have taken an online FEMA training, and then we can toss them off the list. And so the homeowner and the contractor are in contract with each other. We don't have a contract with the contractor, so we have no control over him. The building department should be going out and looking at the work at the end of the project, right? to sign off on that permit. But we know very well that some building departments don't climb under the houses. So we knew going into this that there were opportunities for bad behavior. So we have leverage. And when you can't have a contract, I always say have leverage, and the leverage needs to affect someone's pocketbook. And so the leverage that we have is that we can tell a building department, if we find out that they're not looking at houses, we can take our program out of their city. And if their Chamber of Commerce and their mayor and their city council finds out that we're removing this program, they'll come down hard on them. With a contractor, it's free advertising to be on our list, and we're providing money. We're putting money into the community. We're creating a market for them, you know, without them doing much. And so if they misbehave, we can toss them off. And we have tossed 2 people off the list. And one person came back begging on Monday morning, and the other guy just kind of went, all right, I can't put up with you guys. We do special inspection, where we send a special inspector out to spot check the houses. And for the most part, we're seeing good work. We have found, as I said, we found that one contractor who put bolts into unreinforced masonry. You know, it's just like, it was appalling to me. So we sent a letter to the building department, we sent a letter to the homeowner and to him. And of course, the homeowner, you know, could have sued him. The building department could have sued him. And so he made it right on his own nickel. And so we put him on a probation and sent the special inspector out to look at his work for a while. And he's towing the line now. And that was just a matter of the superintendent, the people in the office who knew what they're supposed to be doing, not educating the people in the field. And so that leverage is very, very important, because obviously if it's not done correctly, the homeowner has not received the protection that they deserve.